Hey guys, in today's video I want to go over a really interesting and instructive Scrabble pre-endgame I encountered in a game I played against longtime expert Morris Greenberg at a tournament held in New York City a couple weekends ago. I was in a seemingly comfortable position in the position you guys see on screen now, given I was up 47 points, 383 to 336, and it was my turn. However, a closer look reveals my position was actually far from comfortable. You see, I had a very clunky rack, KNORUVW, which makes very few words, and the unseen tiles from my perspective that were split between Morris's rack and the bag were very dangerous. There's still a blank left, as well as a Z and an S, along with, as you guys can see on the right, CEEFIPR. So I have a lead, but I also have a lot to worry about that Morris could have. The most obvious thing I have to worry about are potential triple-triple bingos through the L of Litany he just opened, such as flippers, that would score around 180 points and end the game on the spot. However, my problem is, it's not so easy as it might seem to block that L. Amazingly, my rack is so bad that I have no words that play through the L in a way that uses the triple word score in the top left corner of the board. So the only way for me to play through the L would be to start with the L, with a play such as Love for 10 points. And I was strongly considering making this play until I came to a startling realization. Namely, if Morris has the blank, one of the E's, the I, the P, and the S, which is unlikely but certainly not impossible, then he can still triple-triple, this time with the non-bingo of Pluvios through my Love, scoring a whopping 108 points and still more or less winning the game on the spot. So Love might block a lot of triple-triples, but it doesn't actually block all of them. With Love now off the table, I then considered another play from the L, namely Lurk, which does indeed appear to block all possible triple-triples for Morris. And this would put me up 56 points and go straight into the endgame because it plays 3 tiles with 3 in the bag, so now Morris and I would each have 7 tiles and he would have full knowledge of my rack. Now 56 points is a pretty big lead, but I actually was not so confident in my ability to hold on to it after Lurk. Because the thing is, depending on what Morris has, he might be threatening some very high-scoring plays. One play in particular I was worried about was Fees through the E of Barbies. This play alone would score 50, bringing Morris to within just a couple points of my score, and especially if Morris had the S and or the blank to hook Fees on his next turn, and I had a hard time getting rid of my high point tiles from my rack, he could easily go out on his next turn and catch me with enough on my rack to win the game. Let me show you one possible way that could work. In the line I'm about to show you, even though I draw the blank, I'm going to end up losing to Morris's play. If I draw CR blank, then Morris is going to have EEFIPSZ. He doesn't actually win with Fees here, because then I can use my blank to hook Feeses for a large score, but if he plays Feeses himself, then I have shockingly few good options to get rid of the C, the V, and the W from my rack. In fact, I can get rid of all of them, and my best play is to play over New for 20 points through the E of Feeses, keeping just the C. But this is going to fall short after Morris plays out with Tip for 21, getting himself to within 3, and then gets 6 more bonus points for my unplayed C, and ends up passing me and winning by 3, 415 to 412. Now, obviously, this is just one of many ways the game could play out after Lurk. This is just one possible 3-tile draw I could have, but it illustrates nicely the potential pitfall of playing a move like Lurk. And this is even when I drew the blank out of the bag. So imagine how if Morris has the blank along with his big Z play, I'm even more likely to lose. And this was kind of the dilemma I found myself wrestling with. I can block triple-triples, but if I do, then I potentially could fall victim to big Z plays in the bottom right part of the board. The problem is, I didn't really have any great plays myself in the bottom right part of the board, and triple-triples seemed likely enough. I felt I still had to do something to address them. And that's when I came up with the idea of possibly playing through the I of Litany to block triple-triples as opposed to playing through the L. And I ended up playing Vin for 6 points in this position. Vin blocks triple-triples just as effectively as a play like Lurk, and it has 2 other benefits. Benefit number 1 is it also blocks big plays Morris might have from the T in Litany, such as Tiz for 42. And the other benefit is that it doesn't empty the bag. It leaves 1 tile in the bag, so that might make it harder for Morris to plan an effective out into endgame effectively. However, this, guys, is where I actually erred. I should not be leaving 1 tile in the bag. Because yes, in these tight positions, it's often good to leave one tile in the bag, to leave some uncertainty for your opponent, but in this particular case, it's actually dangerous. The thing is, if Morris plays fees and has a good enough rack, he's probably going out on his next play, whether he has 3 or 4 tiles. So leaving one in the bag isn't going to help me all that much against fees if Morris has it. The other big danger with not emptying the bag here is twofold. Number one, it allows Morris, depending on what he has, to potentially play off one tile and set himself up for a bingo or high-scoring play that could even be unblockable, as we'll see very soon. The other danger is that by playing only 2 tiles here, I'm leaving myself a lot of clunk on my rack. I still have a K and a W I'm going to need to deal with going forward. And again, if Morris has a good out and 2 sequence and I can't get rid of them efficiently, he could easily pass me despite my 50-plus point lead in a similar way as we saw after Lurk. So what I apparently should have done here, guys, according to Macondo, is a similar idea, but better execution. Instead of Vin, I should have played Wink for 11 points, which I did briefly consider, but eventually dismissed because I wasn't keen on emptying the bag. But again, I should empty the bag here because it deprives Morris of the opportunity to play off one tile and set himself up, and it also gets rid of now 2 of my 3 high-scoring tiles, so now I only have the V to deal with on my next turn. And it also scores 5 more points than Vin, and you never know, in this close a game, those 5 points could matter. It's apparently a very sizable mistake. According to a Macondo sim that Morris kindly ran and provided the data for, Wink wins for me a whopping 99% of games. However, my actual play in the game of Vin only wins 80%. So while 80% is still a very favorable position, it's a far cry from 99%. So I cost myself nearly 20% in win percentage here by playing Vin instead of the preferable Wink. So with that all in mind, now let's move on to what happened on Morris's turn, which once again will shed some light on why Wink would have been a better play than my actual move of Vin. Following my play of Vin, Morris held the rack of EEIRSZ blank. So it turns out I actually blocked a mammoth triple-triple of Sleazier through the Elf Litany, which would have scored 194 points and won the game for Morris instantly. Instead here, Morris has a very interesting and complicated pre-endgame on his hands, which we're going to discuss extensively. But first, let me show you the cool idea Morris tried to go for. He played Gore for 4 points, playing off just his R. And Morris is obviously setting up his E to play Gore and a possible bingo on the 15 row. But the thing he has to be aware of here is that there's a P unseen, and Gorp is a word. So if I have the P, I'm going to have a play with Gorp and be able to foil his plans. So he actually has to hope to draw the P so that I don't have it. And Morris thought that if he drew the P out of the bag, he was going to win, because he thought that pre-size was a word. And assuming pre-size is a word, if Morris draws the P, then there is no legal way for me to stop him from bingoing out with Gorp and pre-size for 120 points. And amazingly, Morris did manage to draw the P after playing Gore. So that left me with the rack I mentioned before, CFKOROW. And a kind of amusing sequence of events took place here, because like I said, Morris was going for the P, which he wasn't really expecting to get. After all, there were 8 tiles unseen and only 1 P, so his chances of pulling the P were only 1 out of 8, but hey, 1 out of 8 is better than nothing, and indeed, he drew the P. And Morris was kind of excited here because he was expecting now to bingo out with pre-size on his next turn and win the game. And at first I was a little bit concerned when Morris was so excited because I didn't immediately see a playable bingo from his final rack, which I now knew from my tracking to be indeed blank EEIPSZ. So I start double checking my tracking and thinking a little bit more, and I know pre-size is not a word, so I'm thinking like, goodness, like, what does he have here that I'm not seeing? And I also realized that even if he does have something with Gorp or Gore, I really have no way to block it. If I play something, say, from this C like cow, he can still play something starting with the P with Gorp. A play like aggro here isn't going to help either. And something like tack isn't going to really get in the way. He can either hook the E for Gore or maybe even play something with tax. So I basically here have no way to block a bingo if Morris has one, and I was pretty confident he didn't. So I ended up playing Rec for 44 points through the E of Barbies. And this does indeed look to be my best play. Yes, it does give back an 80-plus point counterplay of Zest and Rex to Morris, but I'm going to be up enough to withstand that. And let's face it, Morris already is threatening prizes and Gorp for nearly 70, so 80 isn't all that much more. After I hemmed and hawed for a while and then played Rec, Morris started to doubt himself on whether precise was actually a word. In the end, he made what I think was the sensible decision. He went for it since that was his initial instinct. It turns out that precise is not a word, so after he played precise, I of course challenged this off the board. After all, it was the outplay, so even if I thought it was a word, I would still have challenged. And then I went out with Tofu for 28, and I actually ended up winning this game by a huge amount, 495 to 340, which was not at all reflective of how close this game really was. Morris could have actually saved himself over 100 spread points if he didn't try precise. Like I said, he has Zest for 81, which is still going to lose handily to Tofu, but when all is said and done, he's only going to lose by 50 instead of over 150 as he lost by in the real game. That being said, like I said, if Morris thought there was a decent chance that precise was valid, I can't at all blame him for risking the 100 spread points and going for the win, since after all, wins are still far more important than spread at Scrabble tournaments. So, while Morris's one-tile fish didn't work in this case, it might have in another case. Let's say, for instance, with this rack, Morris had the P instead of the Z. In that case, if Morris played Gore as he did during the game and drew something other than the Z, then I would have had to deal with the Z and probably been unable to block an impending out bingo from Morris in the same spot, and I would have lost easily. So this, once again, guys, was the danger I overlooked with my play of Vin. Especially if I pulled the Z, then Morris might be able to set himself up for an unblockable out bingo in this area of the board, and I might lose. This would not have been an option, once again, for Morris if I had played Wink and emptied the bag, because then, if he fishes, he's only going to have 6 tiles left, and he's not drawing anything from the bag since I will have emptied it. So I got lucky here in that Morris's fish didn't quite work, but it came dangerously close to doing so. After all, if precise were valid, it would have worked, or if I had drawn the Z instead of Morris, it probably would have worked as well. But there's still another very important question, guys, we need to answer. Is there any play in this position that gives Morris a chance to win the game? We've seen that Gore was a very clever idea, but it doesn't quite work. During the lunch break at this tournament, Morris came to me saying he thought he had a solution. He told me that if he played ER in the same spot, then he would have won if he drew the P, because now he's threatening to play Gorp and prizes for nearly 70 points to go out, and I'm not going to be able to block that or outrun that. And he initially was telling me that this would win by a single point if he drew the P. However, I checked his math, and it turns out he was actually off by 10, and that this would fall short by 9 points. Let me show you. If Morris draws the P after a hypothetical play of ER as he did during the game, then I still respond with Rec as I have no way to block prizes. Morris goes out with prizes for 67, bringing him to 412. He gets 12 points for my unplayed tiles, falling short 424 to 433. So another very cool idea, but it's still not quite going to cut it. So what else? Well, Morris ran this position through the powerful engine Macondo, and Macondo finds 2 distinct plays in this position that give Morris a chance to win the game. Both of these plays actually give Morris a 2-in-8 chance to win, winning with 2 possible draws out of the bag, and they're both fiendishly difficult to come up with. One of these plays is the extremely bizarre-looking Farsy, burning the blank for just 24 points. This play wins if Morris draws either the F or the R out of the bag. And the idea here is that Farsy takes a back E, so Morris is threatening either Fezzes or Rezzes as a very high-scoring outplay on the bottom left triple word score on his next turn if he hits one of his 2 target tiles. Let me show you how the wins would play out in each case. First, if Morris draws the F, then I'm going to have this rack. I could block Fezzes and Farsy, but it's not worth it, as I'd have to score very few points, and Morris would still have Feezes through the E of Barbies for 52 points. So my best play here is to just play Rec for 44 as I did in the previous line, allow Morris to go out with Fezzes for 64, and Morris ends up winning by a single point, 434 to 433, after he gets 10 bonus points and all is said and done. If instead Morris pulls the R and threatens Rezzes, then I'm going to have a boatload of clunky consonants, C, F, K, O, P, U, W. And now without the R, I don't have Rec, so my best play on the right-hand side of the board would be Feck for just 26, and I'll leave you guys to check the math that Morris wins easily after Farsy and reses. So my best play in this position is actually this time to block reses with OK for 20, but then Morris can still go out with Caesar for 30, which is going to be enough because he gets 30 points from my unplayed C, F, P, U, and W, and ends up winning by 11, 420 to 409. Any other draw for Morris after the play of Farsy in the original position will lose, as he's not going to have an outplay threat with Farsy, and I'll be able to hold on. But still, a really creative idea that would have given him a 2 in 8 theoretical chance to win. However, that's not all. There's another play, arguably even crazier, that wins 2 out of 8 times, this time with a draw of either an F or a P. The other 2 out of 8 win for Morris is Z for 32 points. Now, this is actually a fairly easy play to see, but what's not easy to see at all are the follow-ups and why Morris wins if he draws either the F or the P. Let's start with the F. If Morris draws the F, he's going to have blank EFIRS, and I've got this rack CKOPRUW. It's not too hard to see that my highest scoring play of Wick through the I in Barbies is going to lose, because that gives Morris a 50-point outplay of Briefs, along with a few other things on the bottom row, which when all is said and done will result in a 10-point win for Morris. But I might not necessarily make things so easy for him. I also might notice that he's threatening to go out with lifters on the top row from the L of Litany for over 40 points and attempt to block that. Let's say I do something like Luck for 15 points. Then Morris would have the amazing 6-way overlap outplay of serifs for 56 on row 13, making abs, te, air, by, if, and z's, and that would absolutely leave me in the dust with Morris winning 442 to 404. So the idea with Z is that if Morris draws the F, he's threatening 2 mammoth outplays, lifters on the top for 41 and serifs on row 13 for 56. I'm powerless to block both of them. I'm powerless to outrun. Morris wins easily. But like I said before, Z also wins if Morris draws the P. And it's a pretty similar idea. If Morris pulls the P, he's going to be threatening lippers on the top for 35, as well as the 5-way overlap Esprit on the 13 row for 36. Now, these plays aren't quite as much as the 41-point lifters and the 56-point serifs, but as we'll see, they will still be enough for Morris to pull out the victory. If I respond to Z with Wick, assuming Morris draws the P, then Morris actually has to be precise here. Lippers, as originally planned for 35, will lose by 3, as that brings Morris to 403. He's going to get 14 points from my unplayed FORU and only reach 417. Similarly, if he plays something like Tripes and Wicks, this is only going to achieve a tie, because that brings him to 406, and then with 14 more, we would tie at 420. So Morris has a single winning play here that he has to find re-dips and Wicks for 44. This would result in Morris winning by 6, 426 to 420. If I try to block lippers, again with something like Luck, then Morris wins easily with Esprit, as you guys can check. And if I try to outrun both by playing the F word at 3D for 24 points, that's also not going to be enough either. Morris goes out with Esprit for 36, bringing him to 404, and he ends up winning by 3, 416 to 413. Lippers in that line would also suffice and win by 2. So there you have it, guys. Z once again winning for Morris if he draws the F or the P. So the final question now is, well, which of Z and Farsy, the play we looked at earlier that wins for Morris with an F or an R draw, should he play? After all, assuming all of these tiles are equally likely to be in the bag, they both win the same 2 out of 8 times. However, as Morris astutely points out in his commentary, the P is slightly more likely than average to be in the bag, and as such, he should play Z. Why? Well, if Morris thinks back to my play of Vin, then if I had held the P, I would have been very likely to have a word through the L, as there are a lot of words that start with PL that I could have had, such as plow, pluck, or plunk. The R, however, doesn't really help me play through the L, as there aren't a lot of words. In fact, there are none that start with RL. So I was fairly likely to have not held the P with Vin, which does increase the chances that the P is in the bag. In fact, if you outright assume I didn't have the P with Vin, then the odds of the P being in the bag go from 1 in 8 to 1 in 3. Because with 3 tiles in the bag, if one of them were the P, then there's only a 2/3 chance I drew it, which means there's still a 1/3 chance it was in the bag. So if Morris is very confident I did not have the P with Vin, which I don't think is an absolute assumption, but is a pretty good assumption, then the odds of the P being the tile in the bag skyrocket, which means Z is actually a significantly better play than Farsy. And guess what, guys? As we saw, as it turns out in the game, the P was in the bag. So had Morris found this idea of Z, again, super, super difficult to see. Can't fault him at all for not noticing it, especially he was getting a little bit low on time at this point. He's got to see the 5 overlap as spree as well as lippers on the top and calculate everything precisely. But if he had done that, he actually would have managed to pull this off and steal this game from me. So really, really interesting stuff. Shout out to Morris for writing up all the detailed analysis. Super interesting and helpful, and also super helpful for me in making this video. Really appreciate it. Shout out to him as always for being a great sport after this game and always a pleasure to play against. Hope to have many more great games with him in the future. Thank you all for watching so much. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, guys, and I'll see you all soon for the next video. Bye-bye.